Patricia Ann Ross, known to all of her friends as Annie, was a female Caucasian born on August 14th, 1943 in Arizona. Annie was well liked by everyone who knew her. Known to be reserved, sometimes quiet, but genuinely friendly and thoughtful to everybody she knew. Her life came to a tragic end on December 11th, 1974, after she was violently sodomized and strangled inside her apartment bedroom in La Palma, California.
This is Things Police See, first-hand accounts, with your host, Steve Gold.
Jim Engen, thank you for coming on the podcast again, my man.
Sure thing. Glad to be here with you.
All right. I'm excited to have you back on. I kind of knew I was going to have you back on because right before we recorded the first interview, you were like the second interview I ever did. Right before that happened, I had overheard a coworker talking with you, and they just said in passing, "Hey, I saw your Crime Watch Daily. It was unbelievable. I can't believe that cold case murder." Right away, I was like, "All right, so Jim will come on twice." And besides that, you're very well liked. As guests that I've had, I've got a great response from the listeners. They want more Captain Engen, so I'm giving the listeners what they want. And you also have this is an incredible cold case murder story, and I mean it's over 40 years old. You're a big part, one of the lead investigators in solving it. So it's fascinating. I watched the Crime Watch Daily. I couldn't look away, so I thought it would be really fun just for you to kind of delve into this case and tell us how it went.
Sure thing, Steve. And let me tell you this: I'm very humbled by your listeners, and it's nice to know that I'm actually well liked out there. All right, so to begin with, the question is, what makes a case a cold case? And really, when it comes to homicides, if a case is not solved or a suspect identified within the first 48 hours, it becomes less and less likely that the case is going to be solved as that clock ticks. This case went cold for a long period of time. Detectives worked tirelessly on this case from the minute they were called to the scene. Hundreds of people were interviewed, and as a result of those interviews, there was no known suspects.
So knowing all that, when you look into a cold case and you start working, there must be a slight feeling of hopelessness that someone else has gone through this thing, all those people interviewed. How are you ever going to solve this? You must feel like that a little bit, right?
You do feel like that a little bit. But let me tell you something. As a case gets colder and colder, and you put a fresh set of eyes on it, and keep your mind open, because as police officers, what we tend to do is we're very suspicious people by nature.
Right.
And what we tend to do is come up with a theory and prove our theory.
We get kind of married to it.
Yes.
Okay.
The other thing is, on this particular case in general, was a feeling that, hey, you can only put the most experienced investigators on this. So what I'm trying to say is you just have to keep an open mind. So what I'm really anxious to talk about with this case is when I first became involved in it, way back in 1996, where the case was 21 years old, not 41 years old.
Right.
But you think about what was happening in 1996. Well, DNA was brand new. It was extremely expensive, but it gave investigators so much more to go on. Fingerprints was the latest, greatest thing. But when DNA came to the scene, it just changed everything. And we knew at that time that we are going to get, and this is all in law enforcement in general, is we knew that we were going to have a lot of cases solved.
Right.
So I'll take you back on into 1990 when I first was hired. La Palma is a very small community. It's got a population of about 17,000. The department at that time was 26 sworn, total staff of maybe 35 for the city. So a police officer in a small town, probably as you know, Steve, is that we do everything.
Sure.
From driving around in a black and white to actually investigating.
A lot of hats.
We had, at that time, 2 investigators and a supervisor in the Detective Bureau. So anyway, I'm just a young officer. In fact, I started off when I was a reserve, working part-time there, literally for free, but I just, was just glad to have a job there. Glad to have, so, because I knew I was doing what I wanted to do. But I heard about this case. It was La Palma, not a whole lot of homicides, maybe one every couple of years. But we investigated our own homicides. We didn't give it to the sheriff's department. We investigated everything.
So that's an option. I know where I'm from in Massachusetts, probably to save the small towns' budgets. Massachusetts is a state filled with tiny towns with their own little fiefdoms. They all have their own chiefs. There's only 3 cities that can investigate murders. I think because it would suck up all of our resources. Like a town like I worked for had never had murders. And if it had one, both detectives would just be, that's all they'd be doing. So we were actually, that was forced upon us in Mass, was the state police would come in and we could do like a parallel investigation, but we couldn't run our own. So you guys, even though you were smaller, you still were able to do that.
Yes, and the other good thing about in Orange County, Southern California, Orange County, the sheriff's department and the agencies work together.
Okay.
So in other words, in this particular case, we were in charge of the investigation, but we were provided all resources necessary by the sheriff's department.
Oh, that's great.
Free of charge. So that was typically the culture in Orange County. Every agency cleans up their own. They don't hand it off to anybody. So I hear about this case, and I knew it was our city's only unsolved case. And I heard about all the theories behind it. I heard, it was probably Ted Bundy who happened to just be coming down here, because that was right at the beginning of his reign of terror.
Right.
There was all this thought that it was either 1, somebody who knew her and was close to her, or 2, a serial killer in the area who happened to venture down here our way. So those were the theories. What police did at that time that was so valuable and so helpful to the conclusion of this case was that they had talked to so many people. So we had a list of names that we knew, hey, it's time to go back and contact these people. So anyway, backing up, I had just rotated into the Detective Bureau in 1996. DNA was up and coming. And I remember I was asking the detective sergeant about this case, and I asked him, I'm young, I'm just rotated in the Detective Bureau, I have absolutely no experience. So I said, Sarge, would it be okay if I went to the evidence room and looked through the Annie Greenthing's murder evidence? And he's sitting at his desk, he goes, yeah, knock yourself out. See what you can find out.
Annie Greenthings was the name of her business, right?
Annie Greenthings was the name of her business. So when she moved out here from Arizona, she met a gentleman by the name of Mike Green, and they opened up a plant store in Artesia. Well, she lived in La Palma. Mike Green wanted Annie to run this business because he had another job. So he was just interested in being 50% owner. So she says, well, if I'm going to run this job, I want to work closer to where I live. So they found a little place in La Palma, about a half mile from her apartment, and they opened up the business there. Well,
clever name, Annie Greenthings.
And I tell you this, Annie Greenthings, because her name's Annie, Mike Green, so There you go. And she was a plant lover. But all of that plays a part in this case. It really does, because that was one small part of many parts that actually led us to solving this case. And it was something to put together, I can tell you. So anyway, I'm going through the evidence boxes, and I'm seeing, Kodak photos of Annie when she had made a recent trip with her younger brother and his wife to Solvang.
Solvang, I just came back from there.
Solvang, California.
That must have been spooky looking through those photos.
It was something, but it played a part in me being able to identify with her. See, Annie didn't have a big family, but by the time I started looking in this case, both her parents had passed. Her younger brother had put this away, so she really didn't have family. So there was no follow up or a whole lot of interest in the family. And hey, what are you guys doing to get this thing solved? There was just no communication, because that does play a big part. When families get involved, they want this to come to a conclusion.
Of course. Okay.
Well, we didn't have that in this case, so it was about us being able to identify with her. So I'm going through these boxes of evidence, and I'm looking at photos, and I'm looking through her checkbook. I'm looking through her ledger. I found a couple of books with a whole bunch of shorthand writing in it, and I'm thinking, wow, what do those say? Who was she seeing? What was important to her? So as I'm going through each piece of evidence, and remember, we're talking the early 70s. This is 1974. I was 9 years old when this happened.
Right.
But, the days of macrame, and I think anybody that grew up in that era would completely understand what I'm saying. Finding in evidence cigarette butts, Chivas vodka bottles, all kinds of different things, still with the fingerprint powder on all of those things that they were testing back then. But then as I'm going through evidence, I pull out a manila envelope, I open it up, and I'm being careful. I'm gloved up. I don't want to contaminate anything. And I see envelopes. They're just like letter-size envelopes labeled unknown blood. So then I got curious. So I'm going through these envelopes, and I see unknown blood found on inside of bedroom window. Unknown blood found on kitchen cabinet. Unknown blood found on bathroom door. All kinds of different things. So then I really started getting into this. I pulled a report, and I'm going through this thing. How was she found? What's the timeline?
And is your sergeant backing you with this, or is he kind of rolling his eyes?
He got to the point where he started rolling his eyes.
Okay.
Because he goes, now, come on, detective. We have cases that occurred here in 1990 to solve.
Sure.
So
this is like your side hobby, kind
of the side hobby. I mean,
yeah.
I'd come in on a Saturday.
Okay.
And just look at these things. And then about 6 months later, we get a memo from the Orange County Crime Lab. And this memo said, if any agency has cold cases, unsolved cold cases, this is just off of memory here. If you have blood or DNA or samples, bring them on in. We'll test them. So there we go. I knew we had 5 envelopes of blood, so I'm getting excited here.
That's awesome. They're probably backed up by 6 months now.
Exactly. So got the evidence prepared. One of the other detectives prepared a testing request, a DNA testing request, and we submitted it to the crime lab. And about 3 months later, agency gets a phone call saying, we've identified some blood, and it's got the Y chromosome, and that's from a male. So we knew it wasn't Annie's blood. So therefore, we have a male, unknown, and that's what we have. So what do you think we're thinking?
They're more than likely the suspect. More
than likely the suspect. So right away we started thinking, hey, we're going to submit this. It's going to go in the national database, and we're going to somebody that's probably in prison, it's going to identify him. We're going to have this case solved. Well, that's what we thought.
Right.
No hits. Nothing. Well, at the time, Orange County had started up a new unit called Trackers. And Trackers was made up of retired detectives or retired investigators that look into cold cases. So the case was given to them to follow up on. So that went for a couple of years. And
is that your agency gives permission for that?
We had to give permission for that.
Okay.
Because I rotated out of detectives and back to patrol in 1999. So I wasn't involved with the case, but believe me, I was thinking about it.
I bet.
So anyway, it died out with trackers. There was no luck. Again, they were looking at serial killers. They were looking at anybody who would be most likely a suspect. Because in fact, all of the people that they had that were spoken with or interviewed back in 1974 were interviewed again and were requested to submit a voluntary DNA sample, and most of them did.
Right.
They want to cooperate. You get your citizen wants to cooperate. They're going to do it. So anyway, still nothing. So then the thought was, this guy's probably dead, or he's out there somewhere and he's old now and he hasn't committed any more crimes.
Right.
Case in point right now, the Golden State Killer. That guy had a reign of terror in the 70s and 80s, and then he stopped. And then there was nothing. But what got him? DNA. Well, now we're going to move forward to 2005. And I was a brand new sergeant, so now I'm in charge of detectives. What do you think was the first thing on my mind?
Yeah, sure.
Hey, we're going to reopen this case. But we were busy. We were understaffed, as many agencies were at that time. So about 2 years went by. So finally, in November of 2007, I had some new detectives come in, inexperienced, and we were down to a point where, hey, we can start putting a little time in this. So I got full buy-in from management. Yeah, you know what? If you want to start looking into this thing, go ahead. So I officially reopened this case.
So you guys had a picture of what had happened
Yes.
that day already to look at.
Yes, we did. So what I did was I had my two detectives, and then I brought in a couple of reserves and also a couple of officers from our admin support unit. Sat them down in the bureau and talked about this case, gave them an overview of it, and said, okay, who's interested in really looking into this? And all hands were raised. So what I did was I provided copies of the original investigation to everybody, and I said, the only way we're really going to do any of this is if, we're willing to work on our own time on some of this. Well, many will say,
most cops aren't a big fan of that.
That's great, but, I would just as soon get paid for it. And that's okay, and that's completely understandable.
Sure.
So I had this one detective, Paul Bracchiadetta. He was just, he was eager, and he goes, Sarge, you know what? If you want to work on the weekends on this thing, let's go. I'm in. Let's do it. So anyway, everybody brought the case home, and the direction was, we're going to highlight every single name in this report, every name. And we're going to make that list. We're going to find out who was talked, who was spoken to, who wasn't spoken to. We scoured through reports. We scoured through transcripts. We scoured through everything. I mean, names, addresses that were in Annie's address books. Everything. We came up with quite a list. Well, we had, thank God for Lexis, or LexisNexis, excuse me. Thank God for that.
What is that?
Well, it's like it's a public access information center, I guess is what you want to call it. That's not the exact name, but basically it helps us identify people where they used to live and where they live now, and phone numbers and address and everything.
Okay.
So that the whole goal was, let's find out where these people are now. And, sure enough, now we are about 36 years into this. People are living all over the United States now. So we went through the list, and the main list was to find out who wasn't spoken to. Well, this one name came up, and I'm just going to touch a little bit on this because it turned out to be nothing, but Well, it was actually something, but turned out to be a guy that Annie was seeing. Name came up in a transcript. Her best friend was interviewed March of 1975 just to follow up and try to get any more new info. And this guy's name came up, and I won't give the full name. I'm just going to call him John.
Okay.
And he's a doctor up in Arcadia, orthopedic surgeon. And what we had found out through talking with the best friend back in 1975 is they would get together once every 6 months, for a night out, just to spend some time together, a little fling.
Gotcha.
We knew that, according to the friend, she would go to his place or he would come to her place. So let's talk to him first. So called him up and found out, in fact, he was a practicing orthopedic surgeon up in Arcadia. And I asked him, I said, does the name Annie Ross ring a bell to you? He paused and he said, no.
Let me ask you something. I recently saw a list that put surgeons at the top of the list for narcissist. Was that in your mind at all, thinking like, all right, surgeons, there's a certain kind of person that becomes a surgeon, doesn't have a problem cutting the human body open? Like,
oh, yes.
Was that in your mind a little bit?
That was in my mind.
Yeah.
That was in my mind.
Yeah. We're thankful for them, but they're a little off,
Yeah. I mean, that was totally going through my mind.
Okay.
So he claimed that he had no recollection of that name. So I asked him, I said, hey, do you mind if we come out to your place and talk to you? And he said, I'm really a busy kind of guy, but if you need to, I don't see how I'm going to help. I said, believe me, you may be able to help. So he agreed. About 30 minutes later, I got a call back. No, I don't think I can meet with you today. So he kept
I called my lawyer.
changing it around. Didn't call his lawyer at this point.
Right.
So as tenacious investigators do, I continue to call him and say, hey, whatever work for you. I don't care if it's midnight. I don't care where you want to meet. Let's just want to talk to you. So finally he agreed. He says, okay. He says, I'm going to be home for lunch. I lived in San Gabriel, and, he gave us a 15-minute window. Well, I made sure that we were right in the area. So, we weren't 40 minutes away. We were 2 minutes away. Then he tried to get out of it again, and I said, look, we're just here. We just want to spend a couple of minutes with you. So finally agreed. So we get to the house, and he's in his scrubs. He's at lunch. And shook his hand. His hand was really wet and clammy. So right away, right off the bat, he seemed very nervous.
Right.
We sit down at the table in his living room, and I break out a photo of Annie, and I handed him the photo. I said, do you recognize her? No, don't recognize her at all. Asked some more questions, and he I could see he was starting to bead sweat on his forehead. He had to get up several times, and we had to put a hold on the interview. So finally, after about 30 minutes of questioning him, we popped the question. So John, we would like to see if you would be willing to give us an elimination DNA swab, because we're asking for DNA from everybody we talk to. And he was the first person that said no. So what do you think we're thinking?
Right.
We may be onto something. So we're excited about it. I get a hold of the prosecutor, the DA. At the time, it was Deputy District Attorney. His name is Larry Yellen. He's now on the bench, working the bench for Orange County. He was excited when we told him we reopened this case, and he says, any resources you need, you got. So we knew we had that help. So first thing we tell him is, hey, we talked to this guy. He's refusing to give us a DNA sample, so we want to get a warrant. He said, now hold on there. He goes, just because somebody doesn't want to give their DNA doesn't mean that we can go ahead and get a warrant for it.
Right.
And I said, yeah, that's true. So I talked to Paul Brackey-Dead, and I said, well, fine. If he's not going to give us his DNA, we're going to get it. So the following night, we parked across the street from his work. He exits his work. He goes bebopping around, gets in his car, drives directly to a liquor store. So we park about 300 feet away and just walks in the liquor store, comes out with a little brown bag.
Oh, jeez.
All right. So now he's sitting in his car, parked at a golf course, and we could tell he's drinking from a cup. So he finishes this, and we're thinking, what the world is this guy doing? Discards the cup, drives away.
Nice.
Well, not only that, but he had some cigarette butts as well. So we beelined it, got the cup, got the cigarette butts, submitted it to the crime lab, and boom, they got DNA off of it.
It's like a movie, Jim. It's awesome.
So we're thinking, hey, boy, we just reopened this case. In a week, we got this thing solved, right? So submitted it. Guess what? Negative.
Damn.
All right, so we were bummed, but it just motivated us even more. And this is where it kind of led us to being on the right track.
The day Annie was murdered, was he involved at all? Was he there?
All we knew was he was in the area. We knew that he was an orthopedic resident at that time, working in Long Beach, right off the 605 freeway. So he wasn't that far. So we figured that he was close to Annie's shop when she had it in Artesia. So we figured they were close, and that's probably how they met. But there's more to this story because we later determined why he was not cooperating with us. But anyway, we focused our attention in other directions. So we're scouring through this report thinking, okay, let's look at it like this. We don't care if they're dead. We want to just identify this person. So we had an officer, Julian Gonzalez, was working with us at the time, former Marine, worked for, he was an investigator with NCIS. He got NCIS on board. And the reason he got NCIS on board was because they have agents all around the country. So their mission was to contact people who were out here at the time who knew Annie and get voluntary DNA swabs from them. And so out they went, and they were doing this while Paul, Detective Bracchiadetta, his first name's Paul. I'm going to refer to him as Paul because his last name is so long. Paul and I were going to focus on, okay, let's figure this out now. Let's say that it's just somebody who happened to be in the area. Well, page 34 in the original report, there was an unrelated incident that occurred back in, it was probably 2 weeks after the murder, and it was involved an apartment tenant who lived in the same building as Annie. So this apartment complex is a multi-unit apartment complex. Each building had 4 to 6 apartments in it. So Annie lived in a 6-room building at the very bottom floor, right in the center. There was an incident with another apartment tenant who lived above and to the side of Annie. So if you're looking at it, you're looking at about 40 feet distance.
Okay.
So the unrelated incident was that a woman who lived right across the breezeway from this apartment tenant saw 2 men. This would have been December 28th. Sees 2 men exit the apartment, and this was the apartment number was 4510. Sees 2 males exit it and then try to open her. She felt like they tried to open her door. So she got a little concerned, but she didn't make a sound, so the 2 men just left. So she didn't report it, but when one of the investigators was up there knocking on doors, still trying to find witnesses from a homicide, she says, hey, this weird thing happened. And she describes this incident to the detective. So luckily, that detective went to the lead investigator and said, hey, this guy, and I can say his full name, he was a witness, Paul Williams, who lived in 4510, was with another guy, unknown name, and he denied totally denied trying to open this woman's door. So then what happens is the lead investigator, Vince Giampa, sends another detective guy by the name of Tom Powers. And this is December 28th, 1974.
Okay.
Tom Powers goes to 4510, talks with Paul Williams. And Paul Williams, he questions Paul about trying to enter this apartment, and he says, I have no idea what you're talking about. That's what's in the report. And then Tom Powers says, well, who are you with? He says, well, I was with my friend Larry Stevens. Where's Larry? He doesn't live here. He lives in Buena Park off this street called Taylor Street, living with the Pridey family. And that's it. So the lead investigator, Vince Giampa, and Tom Powers go back up the following day and re-interview Paul Williams. And they describe in the report on 3 sentences that when speaking with Paul Williams, he appeared to be somewhat nervous. They question him about Larry Stevens, and they, and that's it. I mean, it's like, who's Larry Stevens? Where does he live? And then, boom. No other known follow-up with Larry Stevens. There could have been. We didn't know. But what we did know was Paul and I go, hey, let's go talk to Paul Williams. Where's Paul Williams now? Well, we found out he was living in Lake Havasu, right off the river. So one weekend, we hightail it out to Lake Havasu, off duty, completely off the clock, and knock on the door, and Paul Williams answers the door. Friendly, and so we question him, finding out, okay, what was he doing? And first thing we wanted to do was, what do you think? Get his DNA.
Right.
Okay. So, and he says, absolutely. Volunteered it. So then we asked, well, who's Larry Stevens? He goes, oh, let me tell you about Larry Stevens. He said, yeah. I said, well, when was the last time you spoke with him? He goes, well, funny, he hadn't spoken to him since 1974. So we wanted to find out who was this Larry Stevens guy. Well, what we did find out from Paul Williams was this, that Larry was a big-time marijuana smoker. And back in 1974, that was a crime. It's not now,
Right.
But it was a crime then. And he started telling us a story about how Larry would frequently go to his apartment, and they were friends, and, all he wanted to do was smoke pot. Paul Williams didn't like pot, so Larry would go up there. And he had said that when detectives came to talk to him on December 28th, the detectives had said, hey, we want you to take us down to get Paul Williams' fingerprints. And Paul said that he got a little bit irritated with the detectives and said, look, here's his name, here's his address, you go find him yourself. I'm not going with you. So one of the investigators was a little irritated with Paul. I guess this is what he felt. And he said, the detective asked him, hey, where'd you get that stereo? And then Paul says, I bought it. And then the detective says, you got a receipt for that?
Oh, boy.
And he goes, you know what? You guys can get out of my apartment right now.
Sure.
So they did. So you got to understand, back in those days, those detectives, they had an idea of who they thought it might be. They were focusing on Annie's semi-boyfriend at the time, this guy by the name of Bob Johnson. Because Bob Johnson that night turned up at the party that she was supposed to go to with blood on his shirt. But anyway, they were looking at him.
That day, Annie's day, could you summarize that quickly for the listeners?
Oh, okay. What was happening with her that day?
Yeah.
All right. So Annie she was having some problems with her business, and her and Mike Green decided that they were going to go ahead and sell the business. Well, she wasn't having much luck with it. So on December 10th, the day before her murder, she had 2 women, Donna Davis and Carolyn Tozer, who are both now deceased, agreed to buy the business for $3,000. They met Annie at her apartment the night before, so December 10th. They had a little party, And they agreed. So they gave her a check for $2,000. So they gave her $2,000 of the $3,000 that night. So
back then, that's good money.
That's
right?
good money back then. So she was excited about it. So she decides, hey, I want to get together with my best friends. So he got Sherry Rosen, Bob Johnson, her semi-boyfriend, and then Sherry Rosen's boyfriend at the time by the name of Paul Walters. They were supposed to, on December 11th, they were supposed to have a get-together. So what happened on the day of the murder is Annie helps Carolyn Tozer and Donna Davis do an inventory at the business. At about noon, Annie says, look, I got to make a quick run to the bank. She goes to the bank, comes back. They can complete the inventory. At about 4:45, Annie says, look, I got to get going. I got a hot date tonight, but it might turn out to be lukewarm.
Oh, boy. Premonition.
So they see her leave at 5 p.m., and then no one hears from her again. And she was supposed to be at this party in Seal Beach at 6 o'clock to show up with a pizza. 6 comes by, she doesn't show. Sherry Rosen, her friend, begins to get worried. 6:30 comes by, nothing. So she starts calling her every 15 minutes. Phone rings, no answer. So finally, she told her boyfriend, Paul Walters, hey, can you go backtrack? Maybe Annie broke down. Can you please backtrack to her apartment to see if she broke down? So she gives him a key because she had a key to Annie's apartment, as they did a lot in those days. And he backtracks, ends up at her apartment, and finds her car parked in the carport. He goes, checks the door. It's locked. He knocks on the door. No answer. He enters the apartment with a key. All the lights are off. All the curtains are shut. Completely dark in the apartment. He makes his way into the room, calling out for Annie. He can see a figure in the bed. He turns the light on and notices it looks like Annie is sleeping face down with her head just above the covers. He goes to the bedside. He removes the covers and finds out that she's completely nude. No clothing at all. He checks her pulse. No pulse. This is now about 8 p.m. He discovers her deceased. So that's when we were called to the scene.
And Walters was a state cop, right?
Yeah, Paul Walters was a fairly young rookie California State Police officer.
Okay.
At the time. So now we have a window, and when detectives at the time do a good job, they get all the interviews, they put together a timeline. They did figure that this homicide occurred between 5 p.m. when she got home and 5:45. As they talked to the neighbors, just real quick, briefly, neighbors heard a door open and shut right after 5 o'clock. The next door neighbors. Right after that, they heard the dog barking, which was unusual. She had a little crossbreed dachshund, hairy dachshund, whatever, fairly small. They heard the dog barking for about 15 minutes. Then the barking continued, and then the barking got muffled. Well, during the initial crime scene investigation, they found this dog alive in a dresser drawer, unharmed.
Which is a crazy fact, because the suspect is willing to horribly sodomize a woman with a foreign object and strangle her to death.
Yeah.
But does not kill the dog.
Correct. So here's what they find. Now, mind you, this is 1974. They got the sheriff's department, the crime scene investigation team to come out. So this is what they find. In the condition of the apartment was she's face down on the bed. It appeared that she had some marks on her neck. Her fingernails on both hands were bent upward.
Ooh.
There was blood on the dresser drawer, on the one found where the dog was found. There was blood found on the inside window. There was blood found above a light switch in the bathroom. There was blood found on the bathroom floor. The tub was wet. On her, one leg was shaven, one leg was unshaven. They found blood in the kitchen. So with that, 5 different areas where they found blood. So they determined, okay, so it looks like she was in the bathtub. There was a card for Tomasino's Pizza. So we knew that, okay, she was going to go ahead and order the pizza. She hadn't done it yet. So we knew that, okay, she was in the bathroom. She was either showering or in the bathtub, shaving her legs when she was accosted. And then she was strangled, brutally sodomized, and left for dead. That's really what they had. Well, this is 1974. Thank God they collected blood. Well, back then, they collected blood to type it. Type A or type O positive, O negative, A, B, what have you.
Okay. So they saved it in a plastic bag, obviously.
They saved it in the plastic bag.
And how long can you test DNA and blood for? For just indefinitely, as long as you have.
Well, as long as it doesn't degrade. And luckily, in this case, it was placed in an envelope and it was placed in a dry area, and it was put in a paper envelope. So there was no plastic. So there was no way, there was no moisture can get in where it could degrade. So we lucked out.
Wow.
So I'll go back to
Larry Stevens.
To Larry Stevens. So we're interviewing Paul Williams. We started questioning him. He told us about Larry and said he was divorced. Said he was not a violent guy. He was divorced. He had divorced in 1972, and he was really distraught about his divorce. He said he recalled one incident where he got in an argument with his at the time ex-wife. Her name, we're going to call her Frances. And police apparently were called, and then no further information. Said, okay, so asking more questions to Paul, and I asked Paul, I said, did you ever tell Larry Stevens that the police wanted to talk to him? And then he goes, as a matter of fact, I did. He said the day the detectives came up to question him, Paul, and when he provided them with Larry Stevens' information, he told Larry the police wanted to get his fingerprints. And he said that Larry's reply was, there is no way the police are going to take my fingerprints. And then I said, okay, so what happened after? He goes, interesting thing that you say that, because right after I told him that, he recalled that, because this guy had a great memory.
That sounds like it.
He said, he moved, I think he moved down to San Diego and got a job on a fishing boat. So we go, okay. So, we're starting to, get more and more what's going on. Well, we want to go talk to Frances. She was currently living in Riverside at the time. So after we were done, Paul Williams provided his DNA sample. So we got that. We drove down to Riverside we drove down to Oceanside that same week, and we talked to Frances. We didn't call her. We just wanted to show up.
This is his Larry Stevens' ex-wife.
Larry Stevens' ex-wife.
Okay.
So we had some information on her. So we knock on the door. She answers. We identified ourselves as detectives up in La Palma, and then first thing we want to ask her is, did you ever recall back then a murder in La Palma? I guess she was living in Buena Park at the time, city right next door. She goes, no, I never heard of anything. So when was the last time you saw Larry? And then she rolled her eyes and she goes, I haven't seen that guy since 1974.
Wow.
So she starts painting a picture of him, very different from what Paul Williams told us. Violent. When he would get, she described him as a misogynist. Okay, hatred of women. He was brought up with 2 older sisters who apparently abused him. Said his mother abused him. So now what we want to do is we want to find out, okay, what was Larry doing at the time? Well, she said she hadn't seen him since 1974. In fact, she said she thinks the last time she saw him, and she was doing the math, and it would have been May of 1974. So as we're questioning her, she goes, do you think that, she goes, are you possibly looking at Larry Stevens as a suspect in this? And we said, No, not a suspect. We want to find out. We want to get a timeline here, find out what he was doing. And she says, okay. She goes, I'm going to tell you right now, detective, you guys are on the right track.
Wow.
And because his method of operation, or what we call MO, whenever he would get upset and get angry and get enraged, he would choke her.
Yikes.
So she was so deathly afraid of this guy. So she describes this incident last time she sees him, back in May. She was telling us he would stalk her, want to find out who she was with. She was so afraid of him that she went out and bought a gun. And she kept it with her in her purse. And she said, I didn't care if I was going to get arrested for this. I was afraid of Larry. This guy was just following me around all the time. So finally, one day she says, enough is enough. So she goes to confront him. He was living with his mother. She goes to confront him. He comes around the side of the house and starts to get aggressive towards her. She takes their gun out of the purse, put it between his eyes, and pulled the trigger.
Good
and
for
the
her.
gun jammed.
Wow.
She said that Larry was, oh my God, and he took off, and she had never heard from him since then. So here's what we found out by tracking his movements. We found that took a job on a fishing boat in early January 1975, moved down to San Diego. Goes down to San Diego, works on a fishing boat, and then from there moves up to Santa Rosa. So he's out of the picture now. So what do we have? We have somebody that we could put in the area at the time of the homicide. We have someone who is known to be aggressive. We know that he got wind of this murder from his friend Paul, who he had never talked to since, leaves the area and remains out of the area. So now that's all we have. So, okay, we positively identify him. Well, his name was misspelled in the report. When they listed his name as Larry Stevens, they spelled it with a V, not a PH, and we confirmed that it was a PH.
They spelled
Stevens.
it the appropriate way.
Then we found out that he had an extensive arrest history, nothing for felony, or I should say a couple of felonies. He had been arrested by the Santa Rosa Police Department a number of times, was involved in some domestic violence with his current wife. So we knew that this guy was not a good guy. And we also knew that he didn't like police officers, that he wanted to fight with police officers.
Right.
Well, now we're looking at a guy who's like 65 years old this time. So we get these reports, we're putting our package together, and we're thinking, what do we want to go do? Well,
what year is this, Jim?
okay, now this is
07?
2000. Wait, this would have been we're up to about 2009 now.
Okay.
Okay, so we know we want to talk to him, but we also know that we don't want to just go knock on this guy's door and say, hey, we're looking into a cold case. Would you be willing to volunteer your DNA? For him, he was a special case.
Right.
We didn't want him to know. So we enlisted the help of Santa Rosa Police Department. We gave them the details, and they didn't have the resources. They didn't want to just go follow this guy around and surreptitiously collect his DNA. Well, then we reached out to Department of Justice, and they were interested because they were trying to put together a cold case training for agencies who have unsolved homicides. And we gave them the details on our case, and they were real interested in it. Well, unfortunately, I'm only a sergeant at that time, and I think some internal politics got involved. We had a personnel shortage, but we were ordered off the case.
You're kidding me.
We were ordered off the case because we didn't have the resources.
I'm sure you had your opportunity to lay it out to management, and even then.
Well, even then, so here's what they're thinking of. They're looking at it as we are grasping at straws. They were excited about that first suspect, the first person that we had identified.
Right.
They were excited about that.
The doctor.
But when that didn't pan out, they're thinking, well, these detectives are just grasping at anything. So, you know, what I did was I go, okay, that's understandable. So I put in for vacation, and that vacation was denied. And so I saw the writing on the wall. They knew, or that at the time, I'm just going to say administration knew what was up my sleeve, and I think they just wanted to control the things at that point. So I understand the department was understaffed. They wanted cases investigated that are, recent cases that have a better chance of being solved. And I ended up rotating back to patrol. The interesting thing was, they gave me the file and said, here's the file, have at it. But I couldn't get authorized to go anywhere or do anything. We had a training set up with DOJ, or we're actually, I should say, a training / meeting, because we were going to try to get agents to go follow this guy around and get his DNA and let's get it tested.
Sure.
Well, 2011, 2012 comes. I end up promoting to captain in 2012, but I was in charge of operations, not services, which detectives fell under at that time. Paul was working patrol. Well, in 2014, now we're going to 2014, he rotated back to detectives, and then I told Paul, I said, okay, we got to start gearing up because I think we're going to want to maybe go pay Larry Stevens a visit. So we kept on tracking his movements.
Now you're a captain. You got a little juice.
I'm a captain. I got a little juice.
Nice.
So we're tracking his movements. He's still living up there in Sequoia Gardens, mobile home community up in Santa Rosa. But now I'm a captain, so I'm off the streets. Well, we had a number of people leave the agency, so we were low on numbers through attrition. So just things kept stacking up on us. So just as Paul and I were getting ready to go to the next step, and hey, if it's not Larry Stevens, we don't know who it is. So let's go collect, a discarded cup, something in the trash. Let's get this DNA. Let's get this over with. Well, no sooner did that happen, I get a phone call from the crime lab. And Jean Poutinier, forensic scientist Jean Poutinier, and we had been working together. And she goes, Jim, we got a hit on your cold case. And I'm sitting down, and now I can feel, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to find out if this is Larry Stevens. And I asked her, I go, John, is it Larry Stevens? There was blank over the end of the phone. She goes, how did you know that?
Wow.
And you talk about, someone who feels, anybody out there feel vindicated?
Yeah.
The older administration had since retired. Anyway, I'm thinking, my God, I cannot believe this. It's Larry.
It's so great.
So first thing I did was Paul was he was up in the Bay Area going to training. So first thing I did was call him and I go, Paul, you need to sit down. He goes, why? I go, just sit down. I'm going to give you some news. He goes, okay, shoot. I said, got a hit on a cold case. He goes, it's Larry, isn't it? I go, we were right. It's Larry. So now the DA's office, I get an email from the DA's office. Larry Ellen, still doing homicides. He goes, sends me an email. We need to start working right now. We got to get him. We got to get him pinned down to the area. We got to find out. And I just let him. This was like a long. Whatever. I get on the phone with him. And I'm talking. He's telling me this. Boo 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 boo. And I said, Larry Ellen. I said, we've got you covered. We've already got it in all reports. We have him pinned down to the area. We have him at the apartment complex. We got him.
Oh, he must have loved that.
And he said, oh my God. So let's have a meeting. So we had a meeting. We put together quite a lengthy PowerPoint on where we were in the investigation, what we had done. We had our list of suspects: Larry Stevens, the Dr. John, and then Paul Williams, Larry Stevens' friend, our 3 people.
And this is kind of for the DA to issue
for the DA,
arrest
right.
warrant.
Right. Well, there was no warrant issued at that time. So the way it worked out was we presented to the DA's office what we had. So the goal was, okay, Larry Yellen said, okay, we're going to file this case. However, I want you to get a statement from him. Well, he had been arrested. Larry had been arrested a few times. Well, what happened was, where we got our ID from him, was he was involved. He was a heavy drinker. Both he and his wife were heavy drinkers. And they would drink pretty heavily after 2 p.m. We knew that.
Who needs to wait for 5 o'clock?
Yeah, who needs to wait for 5 o'clock, right? So, and any time he'd drink, he'd get violent. Well, police were called to his house. I guess he was chasing his wife with a knife. Next door neighbors call the police. Santa Rosa police show up, two female officers. And if I can say anything about these 2 officers is they are incredible. And let me tell you why. They had they show up on scene, and Larry has got a butcher knife, egging these officers on, come up and get me. And they're, guns pointed, put the knife down. Larry standing up, you come get me. Well, they had every single opportunity to use deadly force because he was being a threat, but they didn't. They took out their tasers and they tased him, and he immediately gave up. So they got him into custody. Well, Proposition 69, he's arrested for a felony. What are they going to do? They're going to collect his DNA. They collected his DNA at the hospital, and they booked him on felony assault charges.
That is pretty. Tasers only work half the time. So you got a guy with a knife. It was like someone was keeping him alive so that he could rot in jail.
Right. So mind you, this is March of 2015. We got our DNA notification, our cold hit, in May 15th of 2015. So anyway, this guy had a history of fighting with police, and I told Larry Yellen, I said, we'll go ahead and get a pre-arrest interview, but I said, take a look. He's got a booking photo of him sticking his tongue out at the booking officer. And this was from an arrest, I think, that had occurred 4 years before that.
So he's not a young man.
He's
still nuts.
And he's nuts. So I said, we'll do our best. So we put together a team. We coordinated with the Santa Rosa Police Department. And so June 1st of 2015, Paul and I were, along with a DA investigator, went up to Santa Rosa. Met with members of the Santa Rosa Police Department, and the plan was this. The plan was, because of the history we had on him, was, hey, we're going to get him when he's sober, and we want to try to contact him when he's away from the mobile home, maybe going for a walk. And luckily, there was a Santa Rosa officer who had a mobile home 2 doors away from Larry Stevens and his wife.
Perfect surveillance.
So they were set up. So we had the place completely under surveillance. Well, at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, here on the radio, he's leaving his mobile home, wearing a blue shirt and white shorts, going for a walk. So we decided, okay, now's the time. So we drove to the front of the complex. As he's walking around the clubhouse, I see him. I get out of the car and I go, Larry? He goes, yes. I said, Larry Stevens, right? And he says, I am indeed. And right away we knew, hey, we got him. He's sober. He's probably going to want to talk to us. So I asked him for his permission. I said, we're detectives down from Southern California. We'd like to ask you a few questions if you don't mind. Is there some place we can go and talk if you're willing? He says, sure. So he goes, let's go to the clubhouse. So we go into the clubhouse, and there's some ladies there playing bridge. So we're thinking, probably not a good idea to be in here. So he goes, let's go out by the pool area. So we went to the pool area, sat at a pool or a table with an umbrella. It was hot and humid that day, and I could just tell you, I remember Santana was playing. So the mood was set. So what was our goal? Our goal was to just keep him talking. Let him talk. Let him step on it if he's going to. Well, we knew right away. This guy is a very intelligent guy. And we knew right away he knew why we were there. And he was thinking to himself, I'm gonna snowball these. Well, what we did was, our strategy was, we're going to talk to him, but we're not going to focus on him. We're going to focus on Paul Williams, his friend. So the first thing we asked him was, hey, when was the last time you saw Paul Williams? Paul Williams, yeah, he pitched a no-hitter. I haven't seen him since 1974. Okay, so we started asking him questions about how often would he go to this apartment. Was there anybody else he knew in that apartment? Did he know any women in that apartment? Did he ever go in anybody else's apartment besides Paul's? So those were what the questions were. And he denied going into anyone's apartment except for Paul's. He would have no reason to go in anybody's apartment except for Paul's. He didn't date any women. He didn't know any women except for just Paul. So he admitted to going there, and as we were asking more questions about Paul, about 30 minutes in the interview, we had asked him a couple questions about Paul, and there was another guy, a guy by the name of Chris, whose place he was staying at when this homicide occurred. So we were able to ask him enough questions to find out, he was staying here for 2 weeks. This is when this was how it played out. So it was all making sense, and he was putting himself in the right areas. So all that, we're just making our case stronger and stronger and stronger. And then finally he goes, what's all this trip down memory lane, detective? I said, hey, you know what? I go, no case goes unsolved, and we thought you might be a great witness and help us out. He goes, I'm more than happy to help you out. He goes, so you're telling me, is this case about Paul or Chris? And he said, well, it could be. So he's thinking to himself, they're not looking at me.
Found myself a patsy.
So then we started questioning him. Okay, let's get his movement. So when did you go down and work on this fishing boat, Larry? He goes, I went down working on this fishing boat. It would have been Thanksgiving of 1974. Oh, so November. Yeah, about November of 1974. So what he's doing is he knows when the homicide happened because he knew the events. He had a clear recollection of those events, and he knew that he didn't want to put himself there on December 11th.
So he put himself on the boat earlier.
Wanted to put himself on the boat earlier. So as we were going to wrap up the interview, I show him a picture of Annie. So I said, Larry, take a look at this picture and see if you recognize her. And he looks at it, and he starts getting real animated. And he says, yeah, I know her. I know who she is. I said, yeah, who is she, Larry? This is the neighbor of Samantha Stevens from Bewitched. That's for those of you who have been around long enough, that was a television series called Bewitched right. with Elizabeth Montgomery. So, and I glance over at Paul, and Paul's kind of got a smirk on his face. And he is just, oh, yeah. He goes, I don't know. I don't know if I'd have anything to do with a girl like that. I said, why is that? And he goes, she just, I don't know if I can really get myself involved with an actress. I was like, oh, okay. All right. So as that goes, finally it got down to the point where I said, it's time to wrap this up. So I stand up. I position myself directly behind Larry, who's sitting on the chair, and I put my hands on his shoulders. And I said, Larry, would you please put your hands behind your back? You think he asks me anything? No. Paul puts the cuffs on him and says, you're under arrest for murder. And what were the words out of his mouth? Okay, can you go please tell my wife?
He knew.
And he knew.
Obviously.
And he knew he wasn't going back.
How did that feel, Jim?
It
must have
felt, after all that time, I'm just thinking about Annie, and I'm thinking about, this is one of those cases where, murders, the statute of limitations never end.
Right.
It never ends. And at that time, all the work that we put into this, all of our volunteer work we put into this, but I was thinking mainly, I cannot wait to call John, her brother, and say, John, we made an arrest.
So great.
So I did later that day. But anyway, Larry immediately invoked Miranda, which means that as soon as he read his rights, he didn't want to talk. But while he was in prison, or while he was in jail waiting for trial, he wrote his current wife a number of letters that incriminated him in this murder, which helped during the trial. He was convicted in March of this year, finally. He never took the stand. The jury took 2.5 minutes in deliberations.
Wow.
Really just to go in there and sign the guilty and sign the guilty verdicts for all 12. So it didn't take very long at all. And as he was being read the verdict, Larry was just cleaning his glasses with no expression on his face.
He must figure, I stole all that time. I still lived the life.
So Larry, when he moved up to Santa Rosa from San Diego in 1977, got a job with the post office, worked for the post office, and retired in 2012.
What is with postal workers?
My thoughts exactly. So a lot of effort went into this case. When I called John, he was pretty taken back. Her brother, when I called him, he was taken back, and he thanked us for the hard work. But he had put this thing away. His parents, Annie's parents, mother died of a broken heart.
Oh.
Not long after the murder, she died of a broken heart. Father passed away not long after that, and John had just put this away.
Jim, what was there ever a why revealed by the killer?
Never a why. Here's what we've learned, and we are not psychologists, but we always want to find out, the MO. Why did he, the MO and the motive? Why did he want to do this? Well, we have a pretty good idea of why he did it. If you look at a photo of his first wife, Frances, when she was in her late 20s, early 30s, and Annie, if you put them together, you have a woman who is very small in stature, 4'9" to 5'1", barely 100 pounds, a very humble, nice facial features, but they looked very, very similar. We knew that Larry had a very bad breakup with Frances. According to Larry, Frances was having an affair with this guy, Chris Pridey, who, and this is Larry's claim, we got out of the interview with him. We knew that he was living with Chris at the time that this murder happened. Chris at the time was married, so all of these things we figure were brewing in him. Well, the 2-week period that he was living with Larry, he would go frequent Paul Williams' apartment. We figure Paul Williams had gone to his parents' house that night and left just before 5 o'clock. Larry was there. And we figure this whole thing was brewing. He was upset at Chris for breaking up the marriage, being cause of it, is what he told us in the interview. We figure that he saw Annie arrive home. and said, "There's Frances." She goes in the apartment. She had she was notorious for leaving her door unlocked. So we figure he saw her. In his mind, he's thinking Frances. He enters the apartment. Dog's barking right away. Well, there was fecal matter, dog fecal matter, found right by the front door. So we figure he opens the door to go in. Dog freaks out, poops right there by the front door. He makes his way into the bathroom and catches Annie in the bathtub, interrupts her while she's shaving her legs. He's a fairly big guy. He renders her unconscious immediately because per the pathologist, she was alive when she was being brutally sodomized. We figure he got an object from the kitchen, which is why we found blood on the kitchen cabinet. Whatever he used, he took with him. He took him with him that day. So he committed this act and left. Now,
so he also had a reputation for smoking pot, and he could have been high, drunk, whoever. Who knows what else in the system.
Could have been any of those things, but we figured that his
not that marijuana would make you do that.
Right,
But I mean,
exactly.
Who knows what drugs he was taking?
Right. Marijuana would actually have the opposite effect. It would actually make you relaxed.
Right.
Okay. But through the letters that he wrote to his third wife, Susan, from jail, pretty much confirms what we felt the motive was, because he had said in one of the letters the reason he did it was because of Frances. So we kind of figured, hey, these were the events probably that led up to it, but only he will know. And I would love the opportunity now that the case has been adjudicated. He has the opportunity to appeal. We don't know if he's appealed it yet, but when that goes away, then it's
he should die in prison.
Yeah,
right?
he should die in prison. He got life. The thing of it is, he was sentenced under 1974 guidelines, which for murder at that time was 7 years to life, not 25 to life.
Wow.
You couldn't prove special circumstances, which made him eligible for parole. But I highly doubt he's going to see the light of day, because I will be at those parole hearings. It's not going to leave me at all. So it was, there were a lot of lessons learned, and maybe it's something we could talk about another time, but there were lessons learned in this case. But it just goes to show you, if you keep at it, don't let it go, be tenacious, because investigations, you have to be tenacious. I, as an investigator, I think I was a little over the top, but whenever I would leave for the weekend, I would take files with me, just in case I got a phone call or I need to do a little follow-up, just in case. Well, the same thing with this one. It's like, hey, let's do this. Okay, let's go. Let's do that. Okay, let's go. Never, no, this isn't worth it. That's not worth it, because that's what happened in this case. Was the mindset was this was a serial killer, or this was done by somebody who knew her. In our case, it was somebody who had the opportunity,
right,
and had a potential reason, and his behavior after the murder, based on what his friend told us. That's when you start putting the pieces together, and you realize, hey, we might be grasping at straws, but this is a pretty big straw.
Yeah, so there was loose ends left, but you guys had a whole different mindset that helped you.
Whole different mindset.
Those made the difference. And a couple months ago, we were talking about an investigation I was doing, and I was kind of telling you about it, venting maybe. And you said, because the guy had flipped on me and turned into a bad candidate, and you said, you should try not to make up your mind mid-investigation. And I have to believe that was a lesson you learned in this case as well.
Oh, yes, it was.
Very cool. Jim, this was incredible case. You guys were tenacious investigators on it. Congratulations on solving that. And thank you so much for sitting down with me and laying it all out. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Jim.